moment. Okay. Everyone can see that big slide. I am in presentation mode right now, which means I've got the slides up on kind of both my screens and my notes, which also means I can't see my chat. So I won't be able to monitor that. So if you do have a question, just feel free to hop off mute and just ask away. I don't mind being interrupted. Otherwise, we'll have time for questions at the end. So today is our Q3 training. We have 4 trainings throughout the program year. And as you've learned from our introductions, we have site supervisors who are just getting started in their AmeriCorps journey, and other supervisors who have been doing this since September and October. So for some of you, this information might be a little repetitive. For others, you'll be very grateful to be learning about, the prohibited activities and maybe a little bit of a refresher on the host site orientation materials that you have just recently been exposed to. So it will kind of be a combination of review and some new materials that we'll be going over to kind of accommodate everybody in the virtual room today. So for the agenda, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Volunteer Iowa survey that will be coming your way shortly. We're going to have a review of the prohibited activities and just dive a little bit deeper into those so that you have a stronger understanding of what members can and cannot do. We'll talk about monitoring timesheets. So this will be kind of a quick, more of a review of the previous quarterly training that we had. Then we'll talk about evaluations, which about half of you have completed evaluations for your members, and the other half will be getting started on your member evaluations soon. We have 2 reports coming up, and so we'll spend a good chunk of time reviewing those reports so that you feel prepared to get those submitted within the next month. And then we'll talk a little bit about preparing for member exits, as we have some members gearing up to exit from the program in the next 1 to 2 months. So you may have had this survey come out to you yet, I'm not sure, but Volunteer Iowa reached out to all of the program staff to let us know that they are sending out their annual site supervisor and member satisfaction survey. They send this out every year. We don't know what the actual contents of the survey are, but they do ask that we just give our supervisors a heads up so that they can be on the lookout for it. It is expected that all site supervisors participate in this survey. It'll be going out to all of our supervisors and some members. It's a supervisor and member satisfaction survey, so it will really just be asking you questions about your AmeriCorps experience, but knowing Volunteer Iowa, they will always slip in some compliance questions in there as well. So just wanted to put a couple of things on your radar. One being, they'll ask you the program name, and you would be surprised how many site supervisors don't actually know the name of the AmeriCorps program that their member is serving in. So just make sure you list Iowa Community Corps when it's asking for the program name and not just kind of like a general AmeriCorps. And you may also be asked just a few questions about your member activities. And so I just want to encourage you that when you are talking about your member activities and all of the great things that they're doing, that you're really putting the focus on kind of those capacity building activities that are listed in the position description, and less focus on like kind of the day-to-day stuff, and really more of that like higher level, how are they building capacity for your organization. Those are our performance measures, and those are just kind of little, Volunteer Iowa is always looking for little red flags here and there, and so they may interpret something as being unallowable when it's not. And that's why I just say to focus more on the capacity building that your member is doing, and less on kind of like more day-to-day type stuff. And this will make sense in a little bit when we talk more about prohibited activities. So just quick review of the AmeriCorps prohibited activities. These are written into statute. You can click on the link here to look at the full CFR. But by law, AmeriCorps members cannot engage in political activities, religious activities, general fundraising, duplication of staff or volunteer activities, and displacement of staff and volunteer activities. And so we'll go a little bit more into detail about what this means, but in general, AmeriCorps is designed to build capacity for organizations, not have members kind of come in and just contribute to the day-to-day operations for an organization. Sometimes the prohibited activities can seem confusing, especially when you're at an organization where everyone kind of does everything and everyone jumps in when they need to. It can be really hard to like define capacity building versus support. And so we'll spend a little bit of time distinguishing between those things and just understanding what's considered capacity building versus what would be something that we would not want to be like the primary focus of your members' activities. So going into more detail on the prohibited activities, again, these prohibited activities should be posted somewhere at your service site. We ask our members to do that during their orientation. So if you don't have the prohibited activities posted somewhere at your site, please make sure to print them out and get them posted somewhere visible. It can be at your members' desk if they have a designated workspace, or it can be on a bulletin board. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be somewhere visible. And if you haven't taken a look at them in a while, maybe take some time to read through those with a closer eye. But in general, activities that are related to legislation or lobbying, including research activities related to legislation, would be considered prohibited. Those would be considered political activities. So your member cannot be influencing legislation in any capacity. And we'll talk a little bit more about like the differences between advocacy and educating in just a moment here on our next slide. But in general, especially if you're a very policy-driven organization, that's not something that you would want your members to be supporting. Your members can develop like internal policies. So say they're, supporting a volunteer program, they can write policies pertaining to that internal program. They just can't be influencing the big P policy at a legislative sense. They also cannot support any activities that support businesses. So there really should not be any sort of exchanging of money with your members of any kind. So in general, we can't place AmeriCorps members at businesses, and they shouldn't be doing anything that's going to make a profit or increase the revenue for any businesses. That's not really an issue that we come across, but where it gets a little kind of tricky is when it comes to fundraising activities. So AmeriCorps members cannot contribute to the general revenue of an organization, which means they, in general, can't participate in fundraising activities. So that would be annual fundraising events, selling produce that was raised at a nonprofit facility, at a farmer's market, book fairs, thrift stores, plant sales, anything where donations are turning around and being sold, or something that was generated at a nonprofit is going and turning around and being sold. to raise the general revenue of the organization would be considered fundraising. Working at the concession stand or other fundraisers where members are unsure of who benefits, that's just very, that would be just a big red flag. We definitely, if there's going to be any sort of money involved, the members should know where those funds are going. If at all, there should be a general understanding of if they're at a fundraising event, what it's for and who's benefiting, or writing federal grants of any kind. So obviously, again, in AmeriCorps, there are still gray areas and situations where it applies for a member to be at a fundraising event or be at a farmer's market. So, for example, if your organization has a large fundraising event that you would want your member to be engaged in while earning service hours, they could not be doing activities that would be in support of raising funds, but they could, for example, have a table at the event where they are providing some sort of educational element to educate the public on maybe their service activities or something like that. So that would be an instance where a member could be at a fundraising event but not actually engage in fundraising activities. Another example would be at farmers markets. We have sites that grow their own produce and then are able to sell that produce to support the revenue for the organization. That's a model that a lot of nonprofits are adopting now to be more creative about raising funds in an environment where federal funding is becoming more and more limited. We have sites that are being more creative. The member could obviously still serve at that site, but there just needs to be some guardrails in place to make sure that they're not handling produce or contributing to the growing of produce or some item that's going to turn around and be sold. So we have members who are at farmers markets providing, again, education, helping people get signed up for SNAP, raising awareness about Double Up food bucks, or just doing like general outreach for their organization. So that would be an instance where they could be at a farmer's market, but not be engaged in fundraising activities. So I wanted to bring up those examples because they're pretty common things that come up with organizations. You know, typical to have your annual fundraising event and still want your member to be engaged. And then obviously we, as a focus area of ours being food security, we have a lot of organizations that deal with food donations, produce. And so there might be instances where you're at a farmer's market and wanting your member to be engaged. So also just keep in mind what those kind of guardrails are. Education versus lobbying. Wanted to talk a little bit more about this as we are in legislative session. So we just had our Volunteer Iowa Day at the Capitol. I know some other organizations, host sites that we partner with have a day at the Capitol, and it is totally okay for your member to attend. Just very important that they understand the difference between education versus lobbying. So if your member is going to engage in a day at the Capitol or in maybe you have a volunteer event where you have a legislator come volunteer at your organization for a day, we would encourage your member to be involved in that experience. That's great for them to get that experience, but we just want them to understand that any interactions that they would have with legislators would be focused on educating them about the organization and their impact versus trying to influence legislation or persuade them towards any sort of legislative decision. So in general, education refers to giving general information about a program or an organization, such as who's affected, the number of people that are served, the budget or proven impacts and accomplishments, but it would not, the member shouldn't be providing any value judgments to that. So not necessarily saying, I think this needs more funding. That would be a big no-no. Or something along those lines. So not adding a value judgment, but really just stating facts about the program, the organization, providing statistics or testimonials about individuals who have been impacted in a positive way. So activities that would be considered education would be inviting your legislator to visit your site and get firsthand knowledge of the member service and impact. So inviting a legislator to come volunteer to see what the organization's all about, providing a fact-driven pamphlet or statistics about a particular topic, giving a fact-driven presentation, or even creating a video with a client about they have benefited from a particular program. I always encourage members to really lean into storytelling and providing, statistics as like a guiding light when you're having conversations to avoid those value judgments or trying to influence legislation, really, but just speaking about how we'll use AmeriCorps as an example, how AmeriCorps is impacting their professional goals, how it's impacting the individuals that they're serving, or providing statistics about your organization. That's what we want to encourage them to be doing. And we have a whole training that members can watch that goes deeper into education versus lobbying, but just wanted to put that on your radar while we're in legislative session. And important to know, education can definitely be influential. It can definitely influence a legislator to make their own decisions about an organization or what they think, is deserving of funding. But it can't be perceived as persuasive, and the members should not be trying to persuade legislation in any way. Non-duplication and non-displacement. I think this is one of the biggest areas that sites get a little tripped up in when we're thinking about member activities and how to frame member activities to ensure they're not duplicating or displacing staff. So AmeriCorps members cannot displace existing staff duties or activities, and they can't duplicate staff activities. So you can't have a member coming in to serve in the same role as an existing staff member. And if somebody in your organization goes on leave, the member cannot be asked to fill in for that individual. It's really the responsibility of the host site to maintain their day-to-day operations as they would without ever having an AmeriCorps member, again, because the goal of AmeriCorps is to build capacity for organizations, to help you expand the scale and reach of your programming or make programs more effective or more efficient. But the member really should not be supporting those day-to-day activities. So activities that can generally fall into the duplication displacement arena are going to be managing social media accounts. So typically at an organization, they've had a social media account for a long time. And so the member wouldn't be able to come in and manage that account since that's something that has already been assigned to a previous staff member. However, the AmeriCorps member can develop content for a specific campaign or a specific topic that you're wanting to raise awareness about at the organization. So they can't manage social media, but they can create content because that is novel and new. They can't perform custodial activities, especially beyond what is expected of every staff member. So we don't want our members kind of being treated as glorified interns. They are AmeriCorps members with their own position descriptions. So they shouldn't be expected to kind of clean up after everyone. That being said, of course, at any organization, there's an expectation that we all take our trash out at the end of the day. We clean up after ourselves in the break room. We want our member to do that, but they shouldn't be asked to do custodial activities beyond what's expected among staff at the organization. Same with clerical activities, like front desk, receptionist type activities that is really contributes directly to the day-to-day operations, and you likely have an admin assistant or have previously had an admin assistant that's performed those clerical activities. So we wouldn't want a member coming in and doing those activities. And saying that kind of goes back to the day-to-day operations. The organization should be able to perform day-to-day operations, and the member should be coming in and focusing on the activities in their position description and building capacity. Database management is another example. Likely, if it's a database that's already existed within the organization, it wouldn't make sense for the member to come in and manage that database. That being said, they could maybe clean up the database, develop new systems to help the database operate more smoothly, or create a new database to track new data for the organization. That would be an instance where it would be okay. So of course, in all of these, there are always exceptions where we can demonstrate the capacity building element. One major exception, and this comes up a lot, where you're like, well, yes, we've had staff who have done this activity in the past, but the need is so high that we need a service member to come in and do this activity that has been performed by or is performed by other staff members, because the need is so high and we don't have the staff capacity to address it with our staff alone. So if the organization can demonstrate with data that you're serving so many individuals with a program that you need to offer more opportunities for said service, then the member could provide that service, or they can provide an existing service to a new population. So maybe you have an influx of Spanish speakers and you don't have someone who is bilingual on staff. You could bring an AmeriCorps member in that could support that population. Or maybe you've historically not supported youth, or that hasn't been a primary target population. An AmeriCorps member could come in and support that target population. So this is why I say there's a lot of gray area, and there are a lot of ways that the member can do activities that staff have done, as long as there is an element of capacity building baked into that. So just important, especially when you're talking to people about AmeriCorps or talking to Volunteer Iowa, that you're always going back to, this is how our members helping us build, so that there's not the perception that they are coming in and doing just day-to-day operations, because we do know that they are doing so much more than that. We just want to avoid the perception of that. Exceptions to duplication and displacement, these are the 3 E's. It's important to remember those. So the 3 E's are an emergency. So for example, we just had all of our members back in November when SNAP funds were frozen. Our members dropped everything so they could go to food pantries and volunteer. Technically, that's displacing volunteers, right? Because they're coming in and doing the same exact activities as a volunteer, but it was a statewide emergency. So in that case, we want members to respond to the call. It's a priority of the state. So in an emergency, COVID, any kind of state emergency, there's an exception there. The other is education. So if the member needs to, for example, serve in a volunteer capacity. So say, your member is going to get volunteer management experience, or they're going to develop training materials for your volunteer program. You're probably going to want the member to serve in a volunteer capacity for maybe a handful of shifts, so that they can truly understand what the day-to-day operations are and make more informed decisions when they're developing these resources for your organization. So in that case, it makes sense for your member to serve in a volunteer or maybe a staff capacity temporarily, so that they can learn. So education is the other E. And then lastly, everyone does it. So if you're at a smaller organization, for example, and everybody takes turns manning the front desk. Maybe you don't have a designated front desk person. So everybody takes a shift, a 4-hour shift once a week to make sure that the front desk is being supported. If it's a situation where everyone does it, then it's okay for the member to do. If everybody has to go out and weed the garden once a week, that would be okay for the member to do that as well. We want them to be integrated with the staff. And if it was an activity that was previously done by staff but hasn't been done in 2 years, then the AmeriCorps member can do it as well. So those are the exceptions. And it's helpful to think of them as the 3 E's. So in the event of an emergency, if it's for education or if everyone does it, then it's okay for the member to do it too. Any questions on prohibited activities? Does everyone feel comfortable talking about their member activities? Okay, I'll take that as a yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Yeah, you talked about religious activities. They can't be involved in that. How does that connect with what we are doing? And yeah.
Yes. So,
for example, most of us are Christians, and yeah. So.
Yep. So.
Can you just expand on that?
Yes. So the prohibited activities. This is anyone who's receiving federal funds. While they are getting paid federal funds, cannot engage in political activities, religious activities, or general fundraising. So that my salary is paid through AmeriCorps as well. So the same applies for me. So what I do as a private citizen is entirely my business. So if I want to practice my religion or help to get out the vote or whatever it is, I, as a private citizen, can do that. But while I am on the clock, I should say, I just cannot participate in those activities. So does that make sense? So the member could,
yes,
they just can't like lead prayer services or proselytize while they're on the clock. So while they're on site completing service in their AmeriCorps gear, they can't engage in those activities. But what they do as a private citizen is their business. And secondly, if you're like, okay, we talked a lot about the prohibited activities and what members can't do. So I should just remind everyone that just go back and look at your members' position description. That is the guiding light for their service that should guide all of their activities. Every member has a unique member position description that we write in partnership with the host site. So host site comes to us with a pressing need. We design an AmeriCorps position to address that need with specific objectives and service activities. And we get that position description approved by Volunteer Iowa to ensure that there are no unallowable or prohibited activities listed in there. So as long as what your member is doing on a day-to-day basis can be tied back to that position description, then there's not any concern of them potentially engaging in unallowable or prohibited activities. So when in doubt, just refer back to their position description.
Just to take you back, of course, I've not interacted with any member since I'm just new. So my question is, when we are here, we are not doing any event or nothing. And what's their day-to-day like duties they're expected to do? Like they're at Urban Dreams, maybe they have an office. What should we be seeing they're doing?
So I would first start by taking a look at Mayada's position description, and we can schedule a separate time too to meet and kind of go into more detail about Mayada specifically, what her day-to-day should look like. But she's building up a resource navigation program for the organization. So there are a handful of projects that we have laid out in her position description that kind of outlines the steps to get to that. So that will look like her meeting with engaging with individuals as they're coming into the organization and offering support on an as needed basis to connect individuals to resources. It looks like doing research to understand all of the different resources that are available within the community and developing maybe some tools, like a flow chart or something like that. So it's kind of a combination of providing those direct services as well as kind of behind the scenes capacity building, doing research, meeting with partners. So it might be helpful for us to just have a separate meeting where we kind of go into more detail about that, but it looks different. The day-to-day for each member looks different for every member because they all have their own unique position descriptions. Okay. So that's what I have for prohibited activities. I know we spent quite a bit of time on that. So we're going to shift gears and just talk about quickly reviewing timesheets. I know I list the timekeeping do's and don'ts in the weekly update every single week, but I do think it's important. Just, I know it can be easy when you're reviewing timesheets to just hit that approve button and not dive a little deeper, but I would encourage you to even just take a few minutes every 2 weeks to do a quick scan of your members' timesheets and look for these items, or just keep an eye out for the following. So just take a look and make sure the member is keeping up with the weekly target. So your members, when they sign on for service, say that they're going to serve an average of 21 hours per week or 16 hours per week or whatever it is for your member. So please be on the lookout to make sure that they are on average meeting that target. Obviously, there's going to be some weeks where maybe they serve less hours. Maybe there's some weeks where they're serving more hours, but in general, they should be meeting that target. And if they're consistently not meeting that target, that means they're going to fall behind on their service hour requirement. If your member doesn't meet their service hour requirement within that 36 weeks or 32 weeks, whatever it is for your member, they will lose their entire education award. And so we really want to prevent that from happening. We also want them to be providing adequate support for your organization. And in order to do that, they have to be putting the hours in. So just make sure you're keeping an eye on that weekly target. Make sure your members are just distinguishing hours between training and service. There are 2 categories that they can log their time under. One is training, one is service. General rule of thumb, if it's not training, it is service. So anything that's not considered training would be considered service. So that even would be like staff meetings or something like that. So training would be their online training, their host site orientation, the monthly training that they do with the AmeriCorps program, and any training that you are providing for them in order to complete their service activities successfully. Everything else is service. Keep in mind that members can only serve a total of 20% of their hours can be logged under the training category. So if your member has a 675-hour service contract, they can log a maximum of 135 service hours towards training, and everything else needs to fall under service. So 80-20 is the rule. And so if you monitor their training hours, and if they start getting closer to that 20%, we'll have to shift gears. But in general, the beginning of their service will be very training heavy, and then they will get to a point where they're doing a lot more service and maybe having occasional training here and there. So just keep that in mind. If they get to a point where they've reached that 20%, instruct them to log everything in the service category moving forward. If you know, they want to participate in the occasional webinar for continuing education or to support their service activities, that's okay. But really, once they hit that 20%, they should be focused on service almost entirely in order to fulfill what's outlined in their position description. Members can't log more than 12 hours in a day or 50 hours in a week, so keep an eye out for that. Especially as they get towards the end of their service, if they have fallen behind, they might be trying to really cram in the hours, and we want to avoid that. One, because it's not allowed for them to log that many hours in a short period of time, and we also don't want them to get burnt out. Make sure the hours that they're logging align with the anticipated service window. So in their position description, they have a general window of time where we expect them to be logging hours. I intentionally make that window very broad to try and accommodate for fluctuating hours, but in general, they should be sticking to that window. Weekend hours should be kept to a minimum unless your organization has designated weekend hours. If you're open on the weekend, then the member can serve on the weekend, but in general, we want to keep those limited. And then members should not serve on Sunday. Unless there's like a special event, in which case, please let me know so I can keep an eye out for that. So Sunday service generally is a no-no unless there's a special event or something like that. And then, especially for the newer site supervisors, no text in the comment box. Encore has a comment box underneath their timesheet that the member can leave notes in, or you can leave notes for the member. And we just really just ask that you pretend that that does not exist. Do not use that as a means of communication whatsoever. That's because timesheets are documents that can be audited. And so we want to avoid even the perception of maybe timesheet mismanagement. So say a member says like, oh, I accidentally logged time on this federal holiday, or I put time in service when it should have been in training. It just opens up a can of worms for AmeriCorps programming that we just would like to avoid. So if you have a timesheet issue that you need to address with your member, email them directly, catch them in the hallway. Just don't use that comment box feature. Okay, evaluations. A lot of you have already done evaluations for your members. You might have another member though and have another one coming up. So please be on the lookout for an email from me. Once your member is approaching their halfway mark in their service term, I'll send you an email with the member's midterm evaluation, as well as the invoice for the host site fee. The host site fee is broken up into 2 payments. So you'll receive the first invoice about halfway through the member service for their first half of their service hours, and then again at the end of their service. So just keep that in mind. Once you receive the invoice, you have 30 days to pay the invoice and to complete that member evaluation. The evaluation is really easy, I promise. This is exactly what it looks like. So it's just a two-page PDF document. You'll be asked, your member will have to answer 2 questions, and then you as the site supervisor will provide your feedback. Don't sign it, send it back to me after you've filled it out, and then I will send it out for signatures using Adobe Sign. We have to get like the formal e-signatures using that software. So just fill it out, send it back to me, and then I'll route it to everyone for signatures. So that will be coming up for some of you soon. We also have 2 progress reports that are coming up. Site supervisors are responsible for managing member timesheets, evaluations, and submitting the national performance measures. So our national performance measures our capacity building for our AmeriCorps program. I know I've spoken about capacity building ad nauseum at this point, but when you write the AmeriCorps grant, you have to state what our performance measures are. You have outputs and outcomes. So the output is the actual service that the member is providing. In our case, the output is capacity building services. And then the outcome is what actually comes from the output. So it's the result of the service that is being provided. So our national performance measures are that 20 organizations will receive capacity building services. Right now, we have 23 members enrolled at 17 host site organizations. So we're hoping by the end of the program year to add 3 more host sites to reach that magic number of 20 organizations receiving capacity building services. And then of those 20, we want 18 organizations to report that capacity was actually expanded as a result of AmeriCorps service. We demonstrate these numbers through our progress report. So that's the data, that's where you guys come in to provide data to back up how the AmeriCorps member is actually expanding capacity at your organization. The third national performance measure that we have to meet is 100 volunteers recruited, trained, or managed as a result of AmeriCorps member service. So collectively, we hope that our members will leverage the support of 100 additional volunteers. So not the members themselves, but the volunteers they engage with to increase the overall impact of their service. So members track volunteers and site supervisors track capacity. The nice thing about capacity building is that it's a site defined measure. So a lot of you have probably already done this. For some of you who are just getting started, look at your member's position description and think through what site defined measures are easy and doable for you to track in order to demonstrate capacity building. It can be the number of resources your member creates, the number of events they coordinate, the number of partnerships they establish, the number of individuals served through a new program, for example, or the number of systems developed. You do not have to track every single activity that your AmeriCorps member participates in. You just need to pick at least 2 that you can easily track and report on to demonstrate their expanded capacity. Quickly just going to go through the progress report. You guys have the link to this. It is in the weekly update that I send out every week. So make sure you're getting started on this. It's due on April 15th, so you have some time. But the progress report is pretty straightforward. If you've been tracking throughout your member service term, it should be very easy for you to fill out. So you'll provide some background information about your member. Make sure that you indicate the correct reporting period. So that's April 15th is the midterm reporting period. So that's from the start of your member service through March 31st. You'll indicate the focus areas that your member service falls under, whether that's youth mental health, community engagement, resource navigation, or food security. You can check all that apply. You'll indicate if they are providing capacity building services and in what way. And then we'll ask you for some qualitative information. So that can be 1 to 3 sentences to demonstrate in your own words how they are building capacity for your organization. And then you'll provide some statistics to back up that qualitative information. So you'll provide that site defined measure, whether it's resources developed. And then you'll look at how many the member has created and then compare that to the time period previously. Especially when we're wanting you to compare to the time period previously is when we're talking about activities that would otherwise be considered duplicative. So if your member is like recruiting volunteers, we need you to demonstrate how, because of their service, they've recruited more than you have been able to historically. Or if they're providing like employment navigation services, for example, by having the member serving in that capacity, how have you served more individuals than you would have otherwise? So that's why we ask for you to compare to the same time period previously. But it also, your baseline for that might be 0 if your member is coming in and piloting a brand new service or creating new systems or creating new resources. It might not be comparable to compare that to the same time period previously. So just keep that in mind. If you have questions about that, we can meet individually to talk about what you're tracking and how to make that comparison. But yeah, you'll just choose the site-defined metric that makes sense for you. And if it's novel and the baseline is 0, just indicate that, or if it's not applicable to compare it to the same time period for the previous year, you can indicate that as well. Otherwise, we'll want you to look at the total for the member service term, comparing to the same time period last year. That's also why we say track data that maybe your organization's already tracking or has been tracking historically, because then it will make reporting these numbers pretty straightforward. You'll check the box that most accurately reflects your agreement to these statements, and then you will upload the members volunteer tracking form. So your members should be tracking volunteers on their own time. So this is the number of volunteers that they are recruiting, managing, or training as part of their AmeriCorps service. If they're not tracking volunteers, please make sure you meet with them ASAP so that they can start. They should be tracking them. They know to be doing that, but always good to have a check-in to confirm that. They should send that volunteer tracking form to you so you can upload that here. We do a whole training with a member on volunteer tracking so they understand what they should be tracking, but this is how the form looks. There are instructions here. We don't want them to duplicate volunteers, so that's a big one, is to make sure that they are having some sort of either tracking their name or a unique identifier to limit duplication of volunteers. And then another important point is that we don't want the number of volunteers that, or the number of hours that volunteer has volunteered at the organization as a whole. We are only considering the hours that that volunteer has spent with the member. So if you use your volunteer database, if you already use volunteer software, you might not be able to get that information from your existing volunteer software, because that's going to have the total number of hours that your volunteer has served across time for your entire organization. You might have ways to filter it, but otherwise, that's why we ask the member to also keep track on their own volunteer tracking sheet, so that we are not providing an overestimate of the number of hours, and we're only including hours that the volunteer has spent with the member. This is what that spreadsheet looks like. They literally are just going to list the volunteer's name. We don't need to know the dates. We just need to know the number of occurrences and how many hours the volunteer volunteered at each occurrence with the member. And then they will take the total of that to give us the total number of hours per AmeriCorps member. Youth Mental Health Corps reporting requirements. If you have a member that falls within the Youth Mental Health Corps, they have additional reporting requirements that they are required to track, but we do encourage site supervisors to support in that tracking. So maybe have a meeting with your member so that they understand how to track individuals within their Youth Mental Health Corps caseload. And just so they kind of have a general idea of what they should be tracking. versus what they shouldn't. For youth mental health corps members, for a lot of them, that is not the entirety of their service. They have other non-youth mental health projects that they are supporting as well. And so it's important that they understand what circumstances or instances it makes sense for them to track individuals served through their youth mental health activities, and then when they don't need to be tracking. So that's important for you to have that conversation with your member. Their youth mental health activities are written into their position description. So make sure you take a look at that to orient yourself around those youth mental health core activities. This is the cover page that they'll fill out. It provides some definitions, so it may be helpful for you to read through those definitions. And the reporting due dates are listed below. So the next report is due March 15th for the reporting period from their start of service through February 28th. So we'll want them to report the number of individuals that were served through their youth mental health core activities only in this reporting tool. So they'll provide first and last name or a unique identifier, the date that the service was provided. They'll indicate whether or not the service or the member fell between the youth mental health age range. So they should be tracking all individuals that are served with any kind of youth mental health programming. And then we'll further filter that into whether or not those individuals were between the ages of 13 to 24. And then those who fall within that age range will be counted towards one statistic. Those falling outside of it will be counted towards another report. And then they're also going to want to indicate the type of interaction, whether that's a structured one-on-one interaction, a group session, a community event, workshop or presentation, or an unstructured activity like general resource sharing or informal conversation. Again, we just want our members to do their best on this one. This is a pilot program. It's brand new. And so we just encourage the members, if they're doing any activities that are have a youth mental health focus, that they're tracking the individuals served and that they have some sort of system for doing that. We also want them to provide a story or some qualitative data to just provide additional information on the individuals served. And if maybe they have not gotten to a point where they're serving individuals through their youth mental health core activities, maybe they're in the resource development phase, they're doing research to prepare for that, we would want them to still submit the report and then indicate that in that qualitative section here, so that we know in general what they're doing and how they're working towards providing that actual direct service. Deadlines coming up. I mentioned the progress report is due April 15th. So that is coming up fairly soon. If you need to have a one-on-one conversation to really talk through your members' capacity building activities and make sure you feel comfortable completing that report, please reach out to me so we can make a plan. For some of you, your members just started, so you might not have a whole lot to report, and that's okay. We still need every single site supervisor to complete that report. So if your member just got started, please submit the report, and then you can just indicate in that qualitative section, like the member has not served long enough to have built capacity at this time, or lay out like the member's done this training and is starting service activities. So just providing some context and some information to let us get an idea of where your member is at and make sure that they are making progress towards providing those capacity building activities. You'll do the midterm progress report due April 15th, and then there's a final progress report. It is technically due for me on the program level September 15th, but a lot of your members are going to complete their service prior to that date. And so you'll complete a second progress report when your member exits from the program. So the week before they exit, I'll send you a list of actions that you'll need to take, and one will be submitting that final progress report. And I see a hand up. Does anyone have a question, or is that a accidental hand raise? Okay.
Hello, you're talking about membership, and you also sent us kind of like an invitation for us as an individual to join as a member, or I misunderstood it? Why did we receive the invitation to become members?
Can you repeat that, Annie?
Okay, I kind of like received an invitation to be like an American member. Was that a general invitation, or how does it go?
Did anybody
maybe
else
I can
receive an invitation?
Yeah, like be an American member, something like that. Or
I'm
maybe
not
I can
sure.
ask you later.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I send out a weekly email, and that goes out to all of the members and the site supervisors. So it's geared more towards the members, but has useful information for supervisors in there. So maybe there was some confusion around that. I'm not sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's not targeting us as supervisors to be just an American member. It's not targeting us.
No.
I should just disregard it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And yeah, if you got an email and you're confused about it, just forward it to me, because that would be helpful for me to just get a frame of reference around that. But yeah, you're all site supervisors, supervising members, but I do send out communications to everyone. So that might be where the confusion lies. Okay. So as I mentioned, you'll complete 2 progress reports. One, everyone will complete at the same time. That's on April 15th. The second progress report will be due on your members' end date or September 15th, whichever one comes earlier. This includes capacity building and volunteer tracking. Evaluations are due at different times for all supervisors, because members are getting enrolled at different timelines, but in general, evaluations are due at month 4 and month 8 of service. And then last report to keep in mind is that the quarterly youth mental health core report is due March 15th. That is the responsibility of the member to submit, but maybe at your next check-in call with your member, just check in with them on that to make sure they feel comfortable, or answer any questions they might have about that. We have a lot of members who are gearing up to end service. So our first cohort of members were enrolled in September and October, and those members will be exiting April, May, and June. So coming up pretty quick here. It's very normal at this time of year for members who are into their second half of service, but the finish line still feels kind of far away, to start feeling burnt out. We ask a lot of our members, they're building capacity, they have these projects that they're supporting, that they're getting project management experience, and it's exciting, but it can also be draining, especially acknowledging that AmeriCorps members get not the most amazing benefits. So we want to make sure that they are feeling supported. We want them to have rewarding service experience, to grow professionally, but we also want to get them through the finish line. So if you haven't take some time to check in with your member. Make sure you're meeting with them consistently every 2 weeks and just check in to make sure they're not feeling overburdened or overwhelmed, and that they feel like they have a good plan for getting through the finish line. So it's just a good time of year in general to, especially, it's the winter, it's the sad time of year. We're getting closer into spring, but I think this is true for all of us. Like February is a hard month and can be a time where people are feeling burnt out. So just make sure that you're checking in with the member, that you're offering support, that they feel like their workload is manageable, and that they have a plan for getting through to the finish line. If you have any concerns, please reach out to me, so that we can ensure that your member completes their service term, completes the term successfully, and is able to get that education award, because that's a huge benefit that's not realized until you complete the program. Preparing for member exits. So as we get closer to your member's exit date, I will send an email to you and your member with some items that need to be completed prior to exiting. One, your members will do a Life After AmeriCorps training. That will be with me. You don't have to be involved in that, but just make sure that you're letting your member step away from their on-site activities to attend this training. It will be virtual, and it will be about 2 hours. So during that training, we'll talk all about the education award, how to use that, and just kind of navigating life after AmeriCorps. You'll have to do the final evaluation with the member, submit that final progress report. The member needs to submit a sustainability plan. This really is just, it's not anything I want them to feel overwhelmed about. It's just a document that they'll fill out. So they'll sit down with you, if they have not already, and just talk through their service activities and then what plans are in place to sustain their service projects after they're gone. So we want to, again, demonstrate that our members have built capacity at the organization. They've developed new resources or systems, or maybe they've recruited volunteers. So through this sustainability plan, this gives us some tangible data that we can speak to demonstrate how they built capacity and how it's going to be maintained after they exit from the program. So your member might be reaching out to you about that soon, to just have a meeting and help them fill out that document. And then lastly, they have 2 surveys that they are required to complete prior to exiting the program. That's not anything that you need to worry about, but just keep in mind they need to do those surveys in order to exit from the program. And so if I'm having a hard time getting them to fill out those surveys, I might nudge you to encourage them to do so when they're on site. So these are some of the items to be on the lookout for those who have members exiting soon. That is all that I have for our training today. Does anybody have questions? Oh, sorry, I meant to stop sharing. Okay, there we go. Okay, I see there's some stuff going on in the chat. Yes, Audrey, there is a poster that I sent to Carissa, and I will forward that to you as well. Marissa, I can make sure to get that sent to you as well. Is this like the AmeriCorps Serving Here poster that you are referring to? Marissa, was there a specific document?
I think it was for prohibited activities.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't letting me type. Yeah, the poster.
Okay, like the Serving Here poster. AmeriCorps member is serving here.
Yeah,
Okay, yes. Yeah, I will send that out.
awesome.
Any questions about the reports coming up? Any member stories or issues that you might need support navigating? Okay, I'm gonna assume that means that everybody is feeling prepared to complete that progress report due April 15th. But if you do have any questions about performance measurements or reporting requirements, please reach out. Other than that, I am going to turn the recording off. So if anybody wants to ask questions that you don't